I hope that, again, that you will continue to remember next Sunday as Blake comes. I know he's looking forward to that, and I know you will be as well. He and I have communicated several times since I asked him to come, and he is looking forward to it. I think we'll be here a day or two before Sunday, so treat him well. I know you will. He'll look forward to being here with you. I want to mention a couple of things before I begin the lesson tonight. Several of you continue to ask me about the work in Zimbabwe, particularly about what Bob prayed for, about helping those who have been in the accident there. And I want to share just a couple of things with you as we begin tonight. This is a picture of Taka, and Taka is at the hospital here. He had gone back to gather a couple of things and get some crutches. And I'll just show you the picture. I just want you to I don't know if, how well you can see that picture, but I wanted you to see it. And I want to share the last couple of statements that he sent me, the messages that he sent me. He said this, and I'm writing it exactly how he said it. He said, "I thank the Lord that we're all recovering, my brother. Only Moses and Ruwimbo have been returned in the hospital because their wounds are not recovering as they were now being dressed from home. We hope as they have been given beds, they will be able to recover soon. Thank you for your concern. Remain blessed." And then he said, this was, I think, yesterday, "My wife and children are now better, and I am happy that they are now able to walk and do their works as they used to do. I am using crutches to walk, but actually his said crouches, but I think he meant to say crutches, to walk, but I'm feeling better and happy to be home with my family and doing exercises with them. Pass my greetings to your family and all the brethren there." I will tell you that he and the brethren there are very thankful for the help that we've given them. And we've talked about it several times, and I've shown you a few pictures, but all of us know how blessed we are. And when there is a need that we can help with, we have seen fit to do that, which I think is a great thing. The elders have made quick work of that when those needs have arisen, and I appreciate their willingness to do that. And these brethren appreciate that. And we will continue to stay in touch at some point in time. Hopefully, some of us may try to go over and see the work, particularly that they're doing, and evaluate that a little bit more closely and see what they're doing. But right now, we appreciate all of those, both here and over there, who are staying in touch with us about that work. And that means a lot. It means a lot to me personally, to our elders, to all of you I know. But I wanted to share that with you. And as we get things like this, I will share them from time to time, because I want you to know how much they appreciate what we are doing. Remember also the class tonight, the ladies' class at our house after services. If ladies, Beth would love for you to come. Hope that you can. And then tomorrow night at our house at 7 p.m., we'll have a Bible study for all ages. So if you can come, we'd love to have you. And just other opportunities for us to be together. Those things are important, I think. And if you have time and can take the time, we'd love to have you come for those things, if you would. Well, I want to talk to you tonight about repairing a broken relationship biblically. I want to tell you why. I'm hopeful that our service right now is being live streamed, because a couple weeks ago I had a conversation with a lady, good friend of mine, who's worshiped with Beth and me in the past, and she's struggling with some of the questions and some of the relationships even in her own family. And I hope and pray that she's listening tonight. I think that she is. I hope that she is. And really this lesson is intended specifically for her. But I will tell you that as I thought about this lesson, and as I have thought through even in my own relationships, that these are some biblical principles that I think would be very important for not only her or me, but for all of us to hear. And so that's really why I wanted to present this lesson for us tonight. You know, I have a good friend who's a preacher, and he says the problem with the church is the people. And I really agree with that. The problem with that problem is that the people are the church. And there are always going to be problems. And what I don't mean by that there are multiple problems, but I just mean when you deal with people, and when you have relationships with people, there can be problems. Not only in a church environment, certainly, but in any kind of relationship. There are going to be broken relationships. And so I want us to talk about this from this perspective. You know, we might think that when a person obeys the gospel, he or she is just so committed to honoring God and doing everything that God wants him to do, that there are not going to be those kind of problems. Well, we all know that that's being naive. And the reason that I say that is because we all know how each of us are. As good as we want to be, and I believe our hearts are good, I believe we want to serve God, we want to honor Him with our lives, but the fact of the matter is that sometimes we do things that sever not just relationships with brethren, but sever and hurt relationships with everyone. And I don't mean that it's going on all the time, but I just mean sometimes there are those kind of problems. Things happen. Sometimes there's mistrust, and there's unfairness, and there's jealousy, and there's favoritism, and there's resentment. And a lot of those things can filter into our own lives because that's just part of human experience. And I think as a result of those things, sometimes even when we know better, we act wrongly toward people, and it severs or hurts these relationships. And it may be with a classmate, it may be with a coworker or a family member or a brother or sister in Christ or a friend or a neighbor or a teammate or whatever the case may be. But as I even think about my own life, and while I don't believe there have been many that I can think of where the relationship has been hurt, there have been times when I've said things or done things that I wish I wouldn't have done, and they've hurt those relationships. And here's my guess. My guess is that everybody in this audience, as I have introduced this subject, are thinking about at least someone that you know that you need to go and try to repair that relationship with. It's just the nature of the human experience. And my friend, I think, is thinking about that as well. And so I want all of us tonight to just think about some biblical admonitions that I believe can help us. And I'm going to talk about this and the way that I should. I think we're going to talk about it from a biblical standpoint. We're not going to take a long time on each one of these, but I just want to talk about 6 things that I think can help. And I want you maybe to write them down, just think about them and pray about them. And here's really what I want to accomplish. I would like for all of us to maybe find that person that we need to build that relationship back with. And maybe go about it by thinking about some of these biblical admonitions and asking ourselves, is this what we want? Is this what we should do? And I believe that if we'll be honest with ourselves, we'll say, yes, this is what we need to do. So let's begin that. You got to want to mend it. I know you're impressed with the fact that I thought of that, right? You just have to want to do it. And sometimes the relationships have been broken to the point where we don't want to work that hard. And I think we have to do that. Matthew 5, beginning in verse 23, you remember that. That's the passage that talks about if you're going to offer acceptable service to God, acceptable worship to God, before you do anything, you need to go and to be reconciled with your neighbor. Now I want you to think about that. Think about that. Jesus said, before you go and offer acceptable worship, if you have a problem with a brother, you need to go and get that resolved before you even offer this worship. Now just think about the practicality of what he said. And I'm going to ask you, do you do that? Have you done that? Do we solve that in that kind of way? You know, sometimes I think we grow functional with dysfunction. You understand what I'm saying? Sometimes we have these broken relationships with people, and because it's too hard maybe to try to re-engage and to try to assess that, we really don't want to mend it. So what happens is we learn to live with it. And in my truck, I know y'all get nervous when I start talking about automobile, because you know I can't work on any of that kind of thing. But in my truck, I've got to read it. I have a blend door motor that is giving me fits. Now, I have YouTubed how to fix it. And I'm not about to attempt it. I'm just going to tell you right now, I'm not about to attempt it. But the reason that made me want to try to attempt it is because my mechanic said it could be as much as $800. Well, when somebody tells you that, you want to try to fix it. I'll tell you that right now. But what's happened to it is when I turn on my vehicle, and really what that does, if I understand it right, it allows, let me read that because I don't want to mess that up. It's the control position of the vents that control the airflow. And if you really want to know what it is, it's the HVAC actuators. Are you impressed? Ken, you're impressed. I can tell you're smiling at me. It's the HVAC of actuators. And what it does, it controls that flow. It mixes the hot air and the cold air. So now, of course, there have been some mornings when I want the warm air. There have been some mornings recently when I wanted the cold air. But that's what that does. But here's what I've decided to do. Nothing. I'm just going to let it go. And what's happening is that vent it's dysfunctional. Now it's working. If I let it stay on long enough, it'll work itself out. But at some point, that's going to stop working. Okay? And I'm going to have to do something if I want to stay hot or if I want to stay cold in my truck, and I realize that. But for right now, I'm satisfied with it not working like it should. That's a bad situation if it happens to us in relationships. If we have relationships that aren't working, and what we've decided is, I'm just going to let the dysfunction just be maintained. I want you to think about how bad that is. Think about what can happen to us if we let that happen. I have a dear friend. She graduated high school with me. She went to church with me when I was in high school. There were only 4 of us in my graduating class that went to church together. And from the time she was in high school, even to this day, she has had difficulty with her parents. Now, I don't know all the issues involved. But at least on 2 occasions when I've gone back home, I have contacted her. Once I went to her house to talk with her, and once I have talked to her by phone. But I've simply said to her, is this not something that could be resolved? Because she really has no contact with her parents. Her dad has since passed away. Her mother is blind. And if the normal circumstance takes effect, then she will probably pass before too terribly long. And I've encouraged her. You need to try to go to your mother and try to reestablish this relationship. You have to be the one to try to make that happen. Her parents have reached out. Her father reached out to her before he passed. But she was unwilling. And I can tell you right now, when I talk with her, it's a very difficult thing for her to even discuss with me. And she knows where my heart is. My heart is all about trying to help her because I know her parents. I knew her father well, and I know her mother, and I certainly know her. And she knows I'm not coming to her to try to create more problems. I am trying to help that situation. But the unfortunate thing is, listen to this carefully, she doesn't want to. She doesn't want to. And I'm suggesting that if there are those kind of relationships that we want them in, folks, somebody has to decide that we need to make this happen. Now, it may not happen. The person that you have this problem with, they may not react in the same kind of way that you're reacting. They may not want to mend the relationship, but you need to make that effort to mend that relationship. You have to want to do that. That's the first thing. And that doesn't surprise anybody. That's the first thing in any kind of problem like this. Somebody has to want to. Somebody has to say, we've got to do better. And we can do better. And may I suggest that's the high ground. That's something that people need to do if they need to reestablish that relationship. Let me suggest this. There needs to be communication. That's hard to do. Communication requires going to a person. That requires asking questions. That requires listening. That requires working to understand. And all of those things can be very difficult if there's been a problem in the past. I don't care what relationship we're talking about. All of those things can be a problem if there's been a problem in the past. And so we have to sometimes work through that. Communication can be hard, especially if both parties are at odds with each other or if one's at odds with another. That can be a very difficult thing. Proverbs 18:13 says this, he who answers a matter before he hears it, it is folly and shame to him. You know what that tells me? That if you're trying to resolve a situation, you need to listen very carefully. Listening is an important, it's an important characteristic of a person. It's an important characteristic of a Christian. Listen. Listen, don't make up your mind, but listen to what someone's saying. I'm not the world's best listener. This is something that I need to get much better at. But be willing to listen. Sometimes we're so quick to react. And I'm just going to tell you. And sometimes I'm talking about myself. But I don't care to be around people who react quickly. I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in people, and I want to be more like the person that says, I want to listen to a situation, and if you're looking for me to communicate with you, let's think about this, let's try to resolve this, and let's talk about this. Let's communicate about that. And you may say, well, is that really some biblical admonition? I believe it is. I believe that's exactly what it says in Proverbs 18. He who answers a matter before he hears it, it's folly and shame to him. Listen and be willing to communicate, talk, have those kind of conversations. And if there's been a problem in the past, sometimes that's difficult to do. Let me rephrase that. All the time, that's difficult to do. But if you're trying to repair a broken relationship, somebody's going to have to be that. Somebody's going to have to start that. And then let me suggest this. Refuse to gossip and backbite. Sometimes the easiest thing to do when you're trying to resolve a relationship is to talk badly about a person. I would think that we would be beyond that, but that's the easy thing to do. The easy thing is to react and put a person in as bad a light as possible. Turn over to Romans 1. I want you to look at a passage. I don't have this on my charts, but I just want you to think about something. You'll remember these verses, particularly as it relates to the context, okay? But I want you to listen to the kind of characteristics that a debased mind has. This is what Paul would say in Romans 1. This is beginning in verse 28. He says, and even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a debased mind to do those things which are not fitting. Okay? Now, I think we realize the context. He's talking about those who have given up the natural feelings and the natural urges and the natural uses. He says in verse 27, the natural use of men and women, he's given them over to this debased mind. He goes on in verse 29 to say, being filled with all unrighteousness, sexual immorality, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, evil-mindedness. Then he says this, they are whisperers and backbiters. Now, I don't know how to unpack all of that in reference to specifically what he's saying, but he's saying people who are not thinking right, people who have a debased mind and who are not trying to make it better, that's what they do. They are whisperers and backbiters. And I want to suggest something to you. If you're going to try to resolve a situation, you can't be that. It goes back to what we talked about this morning. It talks about having the ability to bridle the tongue. Having the ability to control what the tongue says. And I'm impressed by the fact that we can't be like this. Proverbs 17:9 says, he who repeats a matter separates friends. You know what that says? You just keep talking about it, and repeating it. You're going to do more harm than good. And again, that's wisdom that says you can't do that. Don't gossip and backbite. Not if you're trying to establish a relationship. Not if you're trying to reestablish the relationship. Do not do that. Let's look at a fourth thing. Stop assuming the worst. Stop assuming the worst. I want you to turn to 1 Samuel. I want you to turn to 1 Samuel. You know, we talk about sometime, I like to talk about it, and I think all of us appreciate David for a lot of things. There are some things in King David's life that were bad. But especially early on, I think he did some things that did show that he was a man who wanted his character to be like God's as he could. I want you to listen. I'm going to read from 1 Samuel 24. Listen to this relationship that he had with Saul. Verse 1 of 1 Samuel 24. And it happened when Saul had returned from following the Philistines that it was told him, saying, take note, David is in the wilderness of En-Gedi. This is when Saul is pursuing David. And Saul took 3,000 chosen men from all Israel and went to seek David and his men on the rocks of the wild goats. And so he came to the sheepfolds by the road where there was a cave, and Saul went in to attend to his needs. David and his men were staying in the recesses of the cave. Then the men of David said to him, "This is the day of which the Lord said to you, Behold, I will deliver your enemy into your hand, that you may do to him as it seems good to you." And David arose and secretly cut off a corner of Saul's robe. This is one of those stories where I wish I could have seen it. Because, man, that must have taken a lot of courage to do what he did. Verse 5, "And now it happened after that David's heart troubled him because he had cut Saul's robe. And he said to his men, The Lord forbid that I should do this thing to my master, the Lord's anointed, to stretch out my hand against him, seeing he is the anointed of the Lord." So David restrained his servants with these words. And remember, the servant said, "Hey, this is your day, David. It's just happened, man. He's right here. You can take care of this business right now." And David restrained his servants, verse 7 said, "and did not allow them to rise up against Saul. And Saul got up from the cave and went on his way. And David also arose afterward." Now think about what's going on with David. David arose afterward, went out of the cave, and called out to King Saul, saying, "My lord the king." And when Saul looked behind him, David stooped with his face to the earth and bowed down. Now think about what David did. David is the one who made the contact. David is the one who said, "King Saul, wait." David's the one who bowed down. And Saul is the one who's trying to kill David. And verse 9 says this, and I love this. "And David said to Saul, Why do you listen to the words of men who say, Indeed, David seeks your harm?" In other words, I'm not trying to kill you. If that's what I wanted to do, I could do that. That's not what I'm trying to do. You know what David did? I think David assumes the best for himself, and he wants Saul to assume the best about him. That's the kind of person David is. And I think that's the kind of person that we need to do. We need to stop assuming the worst, and we need to start assuming the best. Even though Saul had this, I'd call it some twisted paranoia about what David's trying to do. Even that, what does the love that we ought to have for people say? What does 1 Corinthians 13 say? Love does what? It thinks what? No evil. Thinks no evil. It always assumes the best. Folks, and I know this is hard, but we need to think the best of people. We don't need to assume the worst. We need to assume the best. Sometimes people disappoint us, but hopefully we can work through that. Sometimes we can't. But we need to try to work through that as much as we can. And then fifthly, let me suggest this. We need to work to establish trust. When trust is lost, it's hard to reestablish. Some of us, I think, probably understand that better than others. When you've lost someone's trust, it takes time to build that back. And sometimes it takes the time because you have to prove yourself trustworthy. And I'm suggesting that to happen, but I'm also suggesting that needs to happen. There may be people in your life who the relationship has gone awry, and the fact of the matter is that it may have done that multiple times. But you remember the passage in Luke 17 about how much we forgive and about how much people need to repent and what we need to do in reference to that? We need to give people the benefit of the doubt. We need to seek and work to reestablish trust. And finally, let me say this. We need to keep up regular maintenance. We need to keep up regular maintenance. When Drew Entrican taught the high school class last quarter, he did a great job, I think, by the way, and I want him to teach that material to our auditorium class and also to our college class, because I thought it was just outstanding material, and Drew's on the ball with a lot of that information, so I hope that he will. I think that he will. But he mentioned something that I hadn't thought about in a while. He mentioned the idea of entropy, and the idea is that everything in the universe moves toward disorder. In other words, if you don't take care of something, that in time, that's whatever is not taken care of is going to move toward disorder. If you pile dirt in a certain way and you leave it alone, at some point in time, that dirt is going to begin to fall. It's going to become displaced. It's going to go in a different direction because it's not been maintained. That principle applies in everything that we do. It applies with our cars. It applies to our homes. It applies to ourselves. It applies to everything. If we don't take care of it, if we don't give it the kind of maintenance that it is, then it's going to, in essence, fall apart. So once we establish that trust, once we reestablish that trust, and once we build that relationship, then we need to maintain that relationship. Remember Philippians 2 and verse 4? Look out not only for your own interest, but what? But for the interest of others. For the interest of others. May I encourage you to do something? May I encourage you to take these 6 things? May I encourage you to find that person that you have kind of dismissed? That you've said, you know what? Our relationship is broken and it can't be maintained. Make the kind of effort that says, I am going to put forth the effort and do what I can to try to resolve this situation. To try to reenact the relationship. Now, it may not work. I'm not here to say, follow these things, follow these biblical admonitions, everything's going to be fine. But I'm saying, don't be satisfied with dysfunction. Don't be satisfied with just saying, well, that happened in my past, and I'm not going to deal with that. It may be that what that person needs is you to reestablish that relationship. I hope this has helped. Giving you some things to think about. I hope it's helped my friend. I hope she's able to listen. But I hope that you'll take these things and try to apply them to your life and try to apply them to a relationship that can help. Maybe if not now, maybe in the future there'll be things that come up and you can maybe refocus your attention on trying to not have these dysfunctional relationships, but try to help those. May God help us in that end. If you have a spiritual need tonight we can help you with, we hope that you'll make that known to us by coming forward as we stand and as we sing.